Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema, exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. Aleister Crowley took an ancient rite of exorcism and repurposed it as an invocation of one's holy guardian angel. The resulting small book, Liber Samekh, also contains elucidating commentary on the nature of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and on magical practice in general. We'll take a deep dive into this important text. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Welcome back to A Talking Shop. Last week we had Julius Caesar, but he won't be back. Unfortunately, he suffered from 23 stab wounds to the back. And if he was better at gematria, he might have been able to trade that in for more life. But, sorry.
Wow, you've been working hard on that one. Good for you.
That's my attempt at a deep cut.
That's two jokes for the price of one. 23 deep cuts.
23 deep cuts. Watch for the next 22.
Liber Samekh. This has been on our dock for a long time. We were going to do this in season 2, and then we didn't get around to it. Did you suggest this one? Why did you want to do this one?
I don't remember for the life of me which one of us suggested. If I suggested this, oh, you know what it is. Definitely, I would have been big support for this one. No pun intended. Now that I think about Samekh being a prop.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we talked about our suggestions for beginner books.
Okay.
And the subject came up, and I think actually around the same time we were airing that episode, we saw Esoterica had, just
Dr. Justin Sledge.
Yeah, him and
the coolest name on the internet.
Him and Marco Visconti, I want to say.
Yeah.
The name. They were discussing the subject of Liber Samekh, and that was coincidental. Like, it wasn't my suggestion of Liber Samekh wasn't prompted by that. My suggestion was prompted by the fact that it was the one that kind of clicked it off for me, and made me realize that there was something to magic that was deeper than just, a bunch of nonsense or a bunch of spooky shit.
Well, talk about that. How did you how did you come across the ritual, and what was it about it that you thought popped?
Yeah, well, I found it in the Lon Milo de Quet book. We were talking about that, and the Magick of Aleister Crowley. And I had picked that book up off the shelf in an Indigo chapters, and this is before I knew anything about Thelema. And I only had an association of Crowley from years back when I'd read some lurid thing about him being a Satanist who had killed a cat 9 times and run off with some school teacher to diddle. And all this horrible.
Yeah.
And he joined a satanic group called the Golden Dawn, and all this sort of thing. So that's my association I had. And I got this book just because it was like, oh, that looks like fun to fuck around with. So, figuring, well, it's going to have this weird magic stuff going on in it. And it reminded me of when I was younger. Around that same time I'd learned about that lurid stuff about Aleister Crowley. I had been reading the Necronomicon, that cheeseball book that you see in also in Indigo chapters. So I'd read that, and that was really fascinating, and I wanted to mess around with that at the time. And I was just such a, taken with the idea of being able to, create a portal to the moon and then to the planets beyond, and in this kind of weird, magic kind of idea that I had in my head. Though I had no idea. I thought it was like kind of out there to expect to get silver plates to make the sigils on and all this sort of thing. So, but fast forward to when I found this other book, I pretty much was in that same frame of mind of like, oh, this is neat. I'll fuck around with this. And it was kind of like very different from my normal life because I was very into the idea of filmmaking and stuff at the time. And I was actually super materialistic, I guess, in that kind of frame of mind where I was distanced from my spirituality for a little while there while I was getting into film and stuff. And I started to really acutely feel that and getting depressed and just feeling like, lacking something or feeling divorced from something meaningful, which gradually I ended up having to address. But when I got this book to just basically fuck around with, I was reading it. It had all of Lon Milo DuQuette's kind of apologia of Crowley, and I had, at the time I was kind of like, I thought it was kind of ridiculous that he's like, it just seemed like jumping into a conversation midstream. So, and then, trying to look at the lesser banishing ritual and all this sort of thing. And like, I had no idea what it was all for. And I was like, okay, how does this fuck with things?
So did you start practicing it right away when you saw that in that book and you wanted to mess with it? Did you start trying to read some of these names or do little bits and pieces?
Yeah, it was very confusing because I had no idea how to pronounce the names and, all this sort of, I didn't know what it was for. And I guess I don't know how closely I was actually reading it or if I was just trying to impose my own expectations onto it or what. But point being, Liber Samekh is also provided in that book, and it's not provided until a little later on. So by the time I'd gotten to it, I think I'd even read the Book of the Law by that point.
Oh, okay.
Because he has the full Book of the Law in that book. And he warned that, it had that comment at the end that this, you should burn this copy after reading, and people who study the book should be avoided as centers of pestilence. And so I basically decided to just read it. I almost kind of went in, I basically figured I was only going to read it once because of this caveat.
Not study it.
And so I read it almost in a trance, not really understanding it, but kind of like just letting it wash over me. And that was interesting. But then by the time I got eventually to Liber Samekh, I remember reading through the ritual and being a little confused about things generally, but then reading the commentary on the ritual, and he starts getting, particularly when he gets into the stuff about the firmament is, he's relating this to the mind, and he's relating what is upon the earth or under the earth, on dry land or in the water. On dry land is material objects that are beyond your sensorial reach. And then in the water is within your sensorial reach. At least I'm just sort of paraphrasing and taking a shot at getting that right. But this sort of thing suddenly made me think, oh, okay, this isn't just, flighty stuff. He's actually correlating this to mental experience and essentially to philosophy. And that's what made me initially start to think of it as like sort of a practical form of philosophy.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting piece of what's going on here, because we've discussed some stuff in the last couple of months that really talks about regards spirits sort of as spirits, and defends the idea that Ayahuasca deserves the name of a god, because and here, trying to get in touch with the holy guardian angel, we read in other places in like Magick Without Tears and stuff, there's a chapter that says, no, the holy guardian angel is not your higher self.
Yeah.
And his first problem with that is he says, like, in what way higher? Like what, like define your terms. What does higher mean?
Yeah.
And then later on, he takes up this idea of what is the self. But in here, it's much more, it's almost pseudo-psychological kind of, where most memorably, the HGA is myself made perfect. And then later on, it talks about how the HGA is the self without restrictions, like those natural instincts, the source of inspiration, the inspiration for all movement, without the neuroses and complexes and and conscious goals in the way, just the pure volition, that integrated self. So I like the chapter in Magick Without Tears that ends with this really kind of like, it sounds like that It's a Wonderful Life, where maybe the Holy Guardian Angel is a human who's passed on from that stage of incarnation, and now his next job is to work with a client on Earth, and and it allows for that possibility. But in here, the way he's talking about it, it is maybe the problem is the word higher. Not the word self, because higher comes with all these moral implications. Yeah. And this is a self without that kind of. Well, this needs to transcend that kind of judgment, that kind of judging thinking.
Not only that, but if anything, this is unifying yourself with the unconscious, if you want to look at it from the way he's structuring it as a psychological kind of model.
Yeah, there's that element of it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wish that I had come across it maybe earlier than I did. This really is presented as a ritual, at least reading it on its own, for attaining K and C. And if I didn't already know that, at least in the AA process, and then also in the Book of Abramelin, both the French and German versions, you're supposed to learn to pray from the heart. So you don't use a structured prayer. You have to.
It's like a spontaneous.
So your prayer should be honest and in your own language, and sort of spontaneous. And you compose it as you go. You add things and you remove things based on how you feel, and it does end up being a written prayer by the end of the ritual, the way Abramelin teaches it, but you shouldn't. But the reason he doesn't teach the form of the prayer is he doesn't want it to be formalized. He wants it to come from your heart. Yeah. And then in the AA system, it's a little bit different. You use a structured ritual, but you've done enough ritual practice up to 5-6 that you can design your own ritual. So people aren't meant to really use this as their HGA ritual. And so I kind of gave this a miss the first time I read it. I maybe performed it a couple of times, but not deeply. But I think if I'd been less sort of conditioned to ignore it and done it more, I might have gotten more out of it. Because the last couple of months of doing it daily and sometimes twice daily, it's been really great. Like I felt a strong sort of sense of momentum, especially the first couple of days. I was taller. Like I'm not a tall guy. I'm like 5'10", and I was taking myself to the movies, and I was walking down Bloor Street, a main road in Toronto, middle of the night, but passing people, every few steps, and I was making a point to looking people in the eye, and I was taller than every single person on the street at 5'10". I was taller than 6-foot guys. It was very, very weird experience to be the biggest guy in the room, but and then it kind of got a little bit mundane for a while, and then in the last couple of days I've been having great experiences too. I've also been, because of the way we talked about the reception of the Book of the Law a couple of months ago, and Crowley says he used the airy portion of this to show Rose the sylphs in the Great Pyramid. And so I had been assigned some elemental evocations to do anyway. So I was using, for a while, not doing the full ritual, but using just the elemental prayers, and found that really helpful for getting through into something quite profound in terms of my the elemental work that I was doing. So it's great. It's great, and it really, even if it's not your HGA ritual, it does put you in contact with that kind of energy
Yeah.
Especially if you do the visions the way he, rather than just reading the text, if you do the visualizations the way he says to do, it really starts to pop.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking, because of the nature of this ritual and the commentary that goes with it and everything else, the way it's structured, we're probably going to be jumping around a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, actually, I wouldn't mind skipping to one little section here. I think it's in part 3. Yeah. And it's the effect the ritual has, which it's itemized from A to E. And this is probably a good thing to start with initially, just because it breaks down what the purpose of the various parts of this ritual are. This might get us a little bit closer to a general view.
Sure.
So we got one of the effects of the ritual is to keep the mind and the various parts of the mind and the soul so busy with their own work that they cease to distract the adept. So this is like, you're pretty much separating your body of light from your physical body in the very beginning of the ritual, after having done some banishing and cleansing of the space and all that sort of thing. And then you're using your body of light to do the ritual in. And then from there, your body of light you can visualize at various points throughout the ritual. Even that kind of like, different sheaths of yourself, as he puts it, that are becoming separated. And you're pretty much busying them all in one thing or another. And also the next thing is to separate them so completely that the soul is stripped of its sheaths. Okay, that's exactly what I was just sort of referring to. Then to arouse in him an enthusiasm so intense as to intoxicate and anesthetize him, that he may not feel and resent the agony of this spiritual vivisection. Just as bashful lovers get drunk on the wedding night in order to brazen out the intensity of shame which so mysteriously coexists with their desire.
That's, thank you for reading that. Continue to read this, but I'm sort of embarrassed to admit that I sometimes kind of felt that I was falling asleep, and this happens to me sometimes because being a parent, you're just always tired. So I'll be doing some meditation work and I'll be like, that was a really weird psychedelic break. Did I fall asleep? Or I won't remember a section and I'll be like, was that sleep? But today, the sort of sleepiness that I experienced didn't feel like passing out. It felt like losing, he talks about defending yourself against the angel. The angel comes in and you have to fight it and fight to keep your own consciousness independent. Mm-hmm. There was this emptiness coming into me, not even just at the climax of the ritual, but at various points during the elemental portions and some of the barbarous names or something, where I would just disappear for a while before the breaks came up. And this idea that the ritual is designed to anesthetize you. Yeah. And there's
a couple of other places where he specifically...
coincidental word.
Yeah, he references that kind of experience as well as being possibly key to the ritual, essentially. So that's good. That's a good sign. The next item up for bid is to concentrate the necessary spiritual forces from every element and fling them simultaneously into the aspiration towards the holy guardian angel.
Pardon me, what section are we in? You said section 3, but I have my sections lettered.
It's point 3, Scholion on sections G and GG.
Okay.
Big G, little g.
Oh, I don't have a point 3.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Okay.
Carry on.
Yeah, fair enough. There was basically concentrating each of the elements, and that's the bulk of the ritual is going around the circle to each of the quarters. As you mentioned, it starts with air, and we then proceed to fire, water, and earth. And we're invoking each of those elements so that we're basically getting the complete picture in that sense, and then finally spirit, both active to begin with and then passive to close with. And we're concentrating all of that into our aspiration towards the angel. And then finally, to attract the angel by the vibration of the magical voice which invokes him. This is the basic purpose or effect of the ritual, of doing this ritual. This is kind of like why we're doing all of this stuff, which is kind of a nice thing to start with, because otherwise, it's a little unclear.
Yeah, here's something I had marked out to read from Section G, the last paragraph of Section G. But this is a side issue. The main purpose of the ritual is to establish the relation of the subconscious self with the angel in such a way that the adept is aware that his angel is the unity which expresses the sum of the elements of that self, that his normal consciousness contains alien elements introduced by accidents of environment, and that his knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel destroys all doubt and delusion and confers all blessing, teaches all truth, contains all delights. But it is important that the adept should not rest in mere inexpressible realization of this rapture, but rouse himself to make the relation submit to analysis, to render it in rational terms, and thereby to enlighten his mind, his heart, in a sense as superior to fanatical enthusiasm as Beethoven's music is to West African drums. And I take that, people hand wave that last bit as sort of like casual racism. But all of anything I found on the internet that talked about West African drum was specifically the djembe, which has, six basic strokes. You come to play the djembe, and it's one instrument. I imagine you could play it as part of a choir or something. But the harmonic nuance of a Beethoven symphony, maybe the word superior, you don't like it. But technical complexity, let's say, you want to... you don't want to just let this sweep you away and with a sort of passion, the way drumming does. Drumming builds you up and it impacts you emotionally. But the nuance of Beethoven's music also very emotional. But there's a very precise sort of harmonic structure and going from movement to movement. So being able to understand this experience. But let's look at the first sentence of this again. The main purpose of the ritual to establish the relation of the subconscious self with the angel. So you're right here to mention the subconscious, this deep self where, let's imagine, I said last week that subconscious doesn't mean anything, but let's imagine the subconscious is instincts, drives, intuitions, these things that inform, these activities that inform thoughts. I like Sartre says there are no subconscious thoughts, because what it means to have a thought is just to be conscious of an idea. But there are subconscious activities, and so you're putting the angel in relationship with these activities that inform thought, and the consequence of this should be that the conscious self. The conscious self becomes aware that normal consciousness contains alien enemies introduced by accidents of the environment. So that there are impurities in the conscious self that interfere with full realization of the self. Actually, it's weird that I mentioned Sartre because this doctrine of existentialist authenticity, it's in this sort of paragraph. It's sort of like what it's pointing at, that the angel should tell you that you have alien elements in your consciousness and begin to explain how to shake those out, which is why they need to be analyzed carefully, like a complex orchestral harmony.
Yeah, Crowley says in somewhere in here that this requires an advanced level of initiation, and what he's getting at there is you want to really know yourself and know your own, as he might put it, complexes, for instance, and your own psychological makeup and your reactions to things and all these sorts of things for this very reason that you want to, you're trying to dedicate everything towards this same single aspiration. And in order to do that, this is what initiation, part of what initiation entails is that know thyself process, which I think, like, sometimes I've heard stories of people picking up this ritual and then doing it as if, just out of nowhere, just jumping in and doing it, and then getting some kind of crazy results and whatnot. And I don't know, I mean, for one thing, it sounds like they're doing it like a one-off thing, and then suddenly this crazy thing happens. That sounds to me like they have their preconceptions about what the ritual is that don't necessarily, like, maybe they haven't read it deeply. And not only that, but Crowley at the end of this specifically says, let the adept perform this for 1 moon once a day, and then 2 moons twice a day, 3 moons 3 times a day, 4 moons 4 times a day, and then 1 moon, the final moon, just constantly in dedication.
Yeah, so he describes something like the Abramelin operation, the slow building up, increasing frequency of prayer, and instructs the adept to do that using this ritual, which is different than the instructions he gives other places where it says that you should design your own. So, yeah. Anyway, I think it's really it would be sort of neat to come into this and just start doing this this ritual and see where it led you without having to worry about all the other labor involved in the AA process or in the Abramelin process. Just take this as it is and see what you can do with it as an aspirant, because it's one possibility, it seems like.
Incidentally, if you're patient enough, he does make reference in one of the notes to a chapter of Liber Aleph, and I don't think I ever bothered to check it up before we decided to actually do this. So it's pretty short, so if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind reading through it.
By all means.
It's very pertinent to the subject. So if we can put it in the frame of mind of the subconscious, the Delta Zeta, which is like in the general sort of Liber Aleph book. It's, look at that, page number 111. And it's De Viris Magnanimis Amore Praeclarissimis, or On Great Men Famous in Love. Know that in the mind of man is much wisdom that is hidden, being the treasure of his sire that he inheriteth. Thus, nigh all of his moral nature is unknown to him until his puberty. That is, this nature pertaineth not unto the recording and judging apparatus of his brain until it is put therein by the stirring of that deeper nature within him. Thou wilt mark also that great men are commonly great lovers, and this is in part because of their general exuberance of energy, but in part also because, consciously or not, they are aware of this secret following, that every act of love communicateth somewhat of the wisdom stored within him to his percipient mind. Yet must such act be done rightly, according to art, and unless such act is of profit alike to mind and body, it is an error. This then is true doctrine, which, if it be understood right of thee, shall make diamond clear thy path in love, which to them that know this not is so obscure and perilous that I believe there is not one man in 10,000 that cometh not to misadventure therein. So this relates to what he's talking about in Liber Samekh, about the idea of this attainment of knowledge and conversation is like it confers occult puberty, comparable to physical puberty. It's you're a child growing up, and you're in that state of mind that's before those hormones start kicking in and that sort of thing. And what puberty puts on you, that that innate kind of he calls it wisdom that starts to come forth from your inner being. This is a direct drawing of a line between those two things, between that physical puberty and this is an occult puberty.
Yeah, that's great. And he says that the moral nature is not known until puberty, and until that time it sort of resides in the subconscious and is sort of released in the in the pubescent stage. When one comes to terms with their moral nature as they come up through the pubescent stage. And I've just heard you read it once. I wasn't thinking about that passage all week. But what is it about puberty that inspires us to reflect on our moral nature? Moral has a weird connotation in Thelema. You know, most people are going to think they mean sort of like ethical codes. Morality is the innate sense of what's right and wrong, and then the ethic is like the written code of conduct. I might have that backwards. It always, my instinct is to think of it as the other way. So maybe I'm, but in Thelema, the moral nature is something more like the volition, you know, the drive for movement, right? Because like in Magick Without Tears, selfishness is the highest moral principle. Because if you're selfish and you take care of all your own needs, it means other people don't have to look after you, at least in part. And also because if you're selfish and you work on exalting yourself, then you become the best version of yourself, and that is just an inherent good. You know, selfishness doesn't necessarily mean like stealing and committing other sorts of atrocities. It's like being self-oriented to and disciplined and working towards excellence.
And can also mean mind your own business, for one thing.
Sure.
Which I think people tend to forget about as well.
And so I think the moral nature the reason the moral nature is related to puberty here has something to do with sex drive and sexual awakening.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to talk about how great men are often great lovers. What more profound instinct do we have in terms of being put in relation with other people, you know, having to deal with another person for one of your basic animal needs, you know? You can eat on your own, you can sleep on your own, but sex is something that requires being put in social context in a very profound way. And so this has a moral dimension in not just the Thelemic definition, but in the traditional way that people imagine that word. There's a sex morality that we learn by relating to other people. And then also, you know, your procreative duties, which I think Crowley thinks we have, you know. I mean, not everyone is going to want to have kids, but I think Crowley believes that progenitating is a vital, holy shit, Mike.
Progeny.
That
progeny development.
That reproducing, having children
Processing progeny.
is fundamental drive that we all sort of share too. So
now I'd like to point out that Yesod is very important here, and I think we'll see more of that coming up as we continue the discussion. But I just want to bring it up now. Yesod being the 9th Sephirah on the Tree of Life, and we have associations there where it's impinging on the physical body, and it's where we get a lot of these sex instincts and a lot of the subconscious and a lot of these concepts developing.
Yeah, this is it. Oh, man, so cool. Yeah, so you in the AA system, you work your way up the Tree of Life from Malkuth to Yesod to Hod to Netzach, and then you go back down into Yesod to climb the middle pillar to get to Fereth.
And that middle pillar is Samekh.
Yeah, is the path of Samekh, which is the Liber Samekh, right? But they're bringing that up in the context of the unconscious. Gives me a new thought, which I've never had before, that Yesod is Ruach. Like it is, you are conscious of the things that happen in Yesod, but it's the part of Ruach that's closest to Nefesh, and even some of the Nefesh functions come up into Yesod.
Yeah,
like
you could say the
things
face of the waters, like in Genesis or something like that.
Yeah, like specifically in philosophy, one of the ways you might think of philosophy is that you work with intuitions. And you think, what are my intuitions? And then you chase the intuitions to the ends and find contradictions. And intuitions are not like instincts. They're trainable, but they're often uninterrogated. And so Yesod is the place where maybe some of these intuitions might lie on the shore between Ruach and Nefesh.
Yeah.
So the idea that we have to try to meet our holy guardian angel there, so that like I've described before, the neshama and the nefesh can make direct can be brought into direct communication with the ego, the ruach, can step back and give them some time to talk. It's really Anyway, cool. This Yesod thing is more fun than I thought.
Yeah, this is one of those things. I love these discussions because it gives us I never went over this with a fine-tooth comb and just, I'd read over it. Like I said, I never followed up the reference to Liber Aleph, so it's so much fun to dig deeper and make these discoveries.
Yeah, so we're talking a little bit about how this works on a kind of epistemological level, like what does it mean in relation to, how we think, how we experience our thoughts, our psychology. What are some other things that I can read that talk about that? Much of what I've marked out has been about Thelemic metaphysics and about the nature of the HGA itself, but I'm just trying to find some more stuff on psychology, since that's where we seem to have started.
There is a note that's that's just basically it'll be probably the last page of the ritual itself. It's just before the attainment.
Mm-hmm.
There's in the passive spirit invocation, and just at the end of that, there's reference to hell. And this is Aiepe, the word Aiepe. If you want to, I'm usually vibrating it in my body of light, and I don't really just say it conversationally, so that sounds a little weird. But his sort of etymological definition is "Thou exalted one, it," and then he has a little bracketed off part. It leaps up, it leaps forth, but the bracketed part is, i.e., the spiritual quote unquote semen, the adept's secret ideas drawn irresistibly from their quote unquote hell by the love of his angel. And then he's got a note to go with that it is said among men that the word hell deriveth from the word helon, to heal or conceal, in the tongue of the Anglo-Saxons. Heal or conceal is like from and that is, it is the concealed place, which, since all things are in thine own self, is the unconscious.
Oh, so you mentioned it is said among men. I was about to make fun of that useless citation, but he probably means something to do with the, is it that makes you neither of us are, as far as I know.
Well, I'm a second degree Mason.
Oh, are you? Okay, yeah. So you would be... You know what this means then?
Yeah. That's why I know the reference.
I see. Well, don't tell anyone.
Certainly not. You don't need to broadcast that sort of thing.
Yeah, so that hell derives from heal. It is the place where, since all things of thine own, it is the unconscious. Yeah, what do we want to say about that?
The idea of hell being the unconscious is, again, building on this. It was a neat discovery. If I want to, and I apologize, I'm trying to make room to keep the discussion. I don't want to just take over, but I might as well follow out this subject while we're on it. he's relating the idea of hell to the unconscious and that sort of thing. As I was mentioning with Yesod, in the oath at the beginning of this ritual, we have just after thou art Asaron Nefer, myself made perfect. There's thou art Ia Bez, which the pronunciation it's Besz, and then Ia Apophraz, which also ends with an SZ. And those two I happened to stumble across just a couple days ago. They appear in the Neophyte ritual as printed in the Equinox Volume 1, Number 2.
Oh, okay, cool.
And they appear, in the Neophyte ritual, the temple is laid out just as you've described it, where you're working up the tree. It's that lower half of the tree below Tifereth and below the Veil of Peroketh. So the Veil of Peroketh would be the far east wall. And then we'd have all the lower Sephiroth, so Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth, all sort of working their way westward. And in Yesod, in the Neophyte ritual, if you check out the Equinox, you will find that there on the floor plan are located 3 devils. There's Bez, Apophraz, and Satan / Typhon.
Oh.
Which is really interesting. And so we have 2 of those devils. And why 2? Well, I mean, we could debate about that, but I mean, everything else in the oath is asserting duality.
Right.
So it seems like that's an important factor for sure.
And this, they become the sacrament, right? So Bez is is Bez the ideas or the actions? Let me see here. So Bez is the matter that destroys Godhead, destroys and devours Godhead for the purpose of incarnating any God. And Apophras is the motion that destroys and devours Godhead for the purpose of creating any God. And then the matter becomes the bread of the sacrament, and the motion becomes the wine of the sacrament. We have in Liber El, it says, I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union. This explains the creation of the cosmos, right? Because we have this pregnant nothing, this Nuit entity, the sky mother, sort of. And why is there anything? Well, there is anything because without it we couldn't experience ecstasy. And so this seems like a perfectly lovely picture. But we also have in Liber El the god of this aeon saying, know first that I am a god of war and vengeance, and I shall deal hardly with them. So the violence is also a fundamental metaphysical principle. And in this ritual, we see, we talked a lot about self, not self duality, and how over the past year and how in marrying them we obliterate both, and the crossing of the abyss seems like this, except for the demon, there's all this peaceful, it's sort of a peaceful experience of non-existence. But in this ritual, in little bits and pieces, we start seeing some of this violence start to percolate through in the way in which it's essential, because without these demons destroying and devouring Godhead, with a consuming, dividing, we don't get the incarnations of individual gods. And the part of the point of that is that in this ritual, that the god is the adept, the human being, rising himself or opening himself up to receive the angel. I shouldn't say raising.
Well, it's interesting to think of it like when we develop this picture of Yesod becoming so important, as you were sort of saying, it's like you work your way up those Sephiroth, and then you're going back down to Yesod. Well, the path of Samekh is also attributed to Sagittarius, and which is the the bowman, the one with the arrow, the bow and arrows. And so you could kind of, I'm picturing, in meditating on this idea, I was picturing kind of drawing back that bow, and you're drawing that down into Yesod and into the unconscious so that you can fire it up into the sun.
Yeah, it's because we do talk about the arrow of the aspiration, right? But it's tough to know quite how to draw the metaphor, because in this ritual we extend the phallus up into the heavens as far as we can, and then retreat down into the root of the phallus. It says the dual self, and then because of the vacuum we've created, the angel rushes in, and we're forced to defend ourselves. More of that violence coming through, and there's a reason we defend ourselves, which I think has something to do with fullness of integration. If in the crossing of the abyss, it's your responsibility to release, to not have thoughts, to not follow Karanzan, to just like let it go and drift and attain non-existence. Whereas in this ritual, you're further down the tree, you're not as fully developed, fully integrated. You're just beginning that process in meeting your angel, beginning, as it says, to your unconscious is your angel is showing your unconscious the way in which your conscious mind contains alien elements. So you're not really ready to let everything go yet, because you haven't fully understood and integrated. So in this ritual, the force of the ritual needs to be so strong, the onrush of the angel needs to be so violent that you can't defend yourself against it. And that's something that you develop through practice. But you will then single out elements as the angel comes in and conquers territory. You single out areas of consciousness, build walls, and try to protect them. And that allows you to identify areas of consciousness. The completion of the invasion is accomplished by defending this citadel and that citadel and that citadel and that citadel until all of the citadels have fallen. If you surrender them, then the conflict doesn't need to continue, and so you might maintain control over certain spots. But if you never surrender, then the enemy needs to obliterate you completely. And in Liber 65, the angel, there's euphemisms all over the place, like a cancer that eats into the blood, or like the venom of the fang of Apep. Is it Apep, the serpent?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Anyway, here, the combined action of these two devils, again, Bez and Epaphras, is to allow the God upon whom they prey to enter into enjoyment of existence through the sacrament of dividual life and love. Dividual, at first I thought that just meant individual, like maybe he was being fancy, but maybe dividual, like divided life and love. Like you said,
the unconscious is like not dividual in the sense that it's kind of a continuum, I guess you could say. And so this is, by becoming conscious, it becomes like the nature of creating these mental thoughts and structures and things is based on the idea of individuality and that. So, actually, we have here a little bit of a reflection of the earliest, the early creation myth, where the twin of man is torn apart to create the cosmos, right? Because these devour God, so some of God is eaten and presumably excreted. Some of God is destroyed, so presumably torn apart and thrown to the corners, And so these demons are creating the earth by creating the cosmos, the world, the earth, by destroying Godhead. But then Godhead
then the individual God is also striving to unite. And so we have this picture already of divided for love's sake for the chance of union. But what reading this ritual starts to make it clear to me is that this is not a process of like in the Bible where man is kicked out of Eden and then eventually the second Jerusalem falls from heaven and becomes the bride of Christ. And then everybody's happy. This is like a constant churning, burning process of new division and new devouring and new excretion, and then new sort of fierce aspiration and union. There's a continuing spiritual
not only that,
churn.
This sounds like there's even like an actual death as you unify with the angel. So I think that's kind of a lower level reflection of what you would look forward to becoming a master of the temple as well.
All of this seems very master of the temple-y, which is like figuring out the ways in which it's different is important, right? So like you defend yourself against the onslaught of the angel rather than refusing to combat Karanzan and letting yourself go. These little distinctions are important because otherwise so much of this language starts to seem the same, right?
Well, I mean, in some of Crowley's commentary in Liber 65, he also talks about he's comparing, I think there's one point when he's talking about fire where he's referring to stages that, he's more related to the Master of the Temple, and he's sort of comparing the Master of the Temple process to the knowledge and conversation, and pretty much saying I couldn't see the knowledge and conversation, somebody going too far wrong to the point where they couldn't, readjust and try again at a later time. But with the Master of the Temple, it's a different story altogether.
That's right. Yeah. And even here, if you fail to fully defend your citadel, if you surrender at any point and an atom of consciousness remains untested, then that atom of consciousness, he says, it has the potential to throw the whole thing off kilter.
If nothing else, it stains the the bridal bed.
Almost in the same way he talks about the holding back one drop of blood in the body. Initially you may seem like a master of the temple, but you retain some of these hang-ups. But again, there's a difference here, which you're right to point to. Yeah, so here's what we've been talking about. Now let him strive with all the strength of his soul to withstand the will of his angel, conceal himself in the closest cell of the citadel of consciousness. Let him consecrate himself to resist the assault of the voice and the vibration until his consciousness faint away into nothing. For if there abide unabsorbed even one single atom of the false ego, that atom should stain the virginity, you're right, stain the marriage bed, should stain the virginity of the true self and profane the oath. Then the atom should be so inflamed by the approach of the angel that it should overwhelm the rest of the mind, tyrannize over it, and become an insane despot to the total ruin of the realm. So, sounds like very much like what he was describing with Black Brothers, right?
Yeah.
But he goes on, but all being dead to sense, who then is able to strive against the angel? He shall intensify the stress of his spirit so that his loyal legion of lion serpents leap from the ambush, awakening the adept to witness their will and sweep him with them in their enthusiasm, so that he shall consciously partake of their purpose and seize in its simplicity the solution of all his perplexities. So there's this warning of, what if an iota of consciousness remains, it becomes a tyrant and throws off the whole to the blasphemy against the whole operation. But then but you can't, and because the angel has an army of lion serpents, and if the operation is properly performed, it'll just sweep away all of consciousness. So it's much less of a worry.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea, if one way of looking at it is to unify with the unconscious or the subconscious, then that kind of makes a lot of sense, right? Like, you're not going to be able to be really conscious. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, well, let's try to get this right. At least based on what we've read so far, it's the idea that the angel unifies with the unconscious, so that then the conscious will can be informed of impurities within the normal consciousness. So it's not that the conscious mind gets integrated with the unconscious mind and you no longer have a subconscious. It's that there's the influence of Tifereth, but really of the supernals is now communicating down there with the animal soul.
Well, I think that's the tricky thing here, is that I don't know that it's I don't know, because I think both things are not mutually exclusive.
Like I said, based on what we read so far,
Yeah.
there might be more in here that defends what you're saying.
Because I think there's a natural tendency to map these things out just the way that you're saying. Mm-hmm. Like, what you're saying does make total sense. I'm just basically not 100% clear that it's as linear and mapped out as that. You know what I mean? It's sort of like just because when we visualize the tree, we see the unconscious coming up from Yesod. That's just tied in with your mental kind of conception of the tree, right? Whereas the way that it's coming down from Kether as well, I just don't feel like it's I don't think it's an either-or situation, basically. I don't have a complete backup for that yet, but...
I just watched this movie, Lucy, where it's basically Flowers for Algernon, but with gangsters. Mm-hmm. So that gangsters make everything better. But they repeat in the film this fallacy that humans only use 10% of their brains. And then Lucy takes a drug by accident and can use 67% of her brain or something, and then then she can melt computers and turn them into a black goo and build supercomputers and all sorts of she can hear people's thoughts and remember her pre-birth and all sorts of this stuff. And
I remember when people believed this
and
stuff.
The thing is, we use 100% of our brains. Mm-hmm. Evolution would eliminate anything we didn't need, and so fully integrating the consciousness with the unconscious would mean that you had to consciously digest your own food and balance your endocrine system and beat your own heart. And there are yogis who claim that they can do this, but they do it voluntarily. And so maybe, there are places where spiritually this sort of thing starts to happen.
But this is the thing, I think even that language of unifying the conscious with the unconscious is just a convenience. Mm-hmm. That's part of the problem, I think, is that it's not necessarily a literal description of what's happening, but it's one that he's been using. Well, let's try to find some places where he uses it as we go through here. Can you point to an example of where he's, for instance, just to compare? I'm suggesting that he hasn't really talked about things coming down from Kether and from Tifereth per se. Can you find something to back up your argument? Oh, well, let's see here. The main purpose of this ritual is to establish the relation of the subconscious self with the angel in such a way that the adept is aware that his angel is the unity which is expressed in the sum of the elements of the self, and that his normal consciousness contains alien elements introduced by the accidents of his environment. So what I'm saying is that he says the relation of the subconscious self, like you're saying, subconscious self, that's very important, but with the angel,
not with the
So
conscious
he's not saying
self.
they're one the same thing.
He's putting the angel in relationship with the subconscious self, not the subconscious self in relationship with the conscious self.
Yeah.
The conscious self becomes aware that the angel is the total self, and by comparing the angel with the conscious self, can then realize that the conscious self contains impurities, because the total self is missing things that the conscious self has. So then, there's alien elements, but it's not the conscious self integrating with the subconscious self. It's the angel integrating with subconscious self, and somehow that produces this conscious realization. At least that's what's in this one small paragraph.
The image I'm getting is like, okay, yeah, the angel is in Tifereth. Can't really argue that. And the angel is described, I think in the end of his commentary, is described as being the center of gravity, and also having access via paths to all the Sephiroth around it and that sort of thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The angel's in Tifereth, so you think it's the Ruach integrating with the subconscious self, because the Tifereth is the center of the Ruach. He says, as far as the adept is concerned, the angel is in Tifereth, because the adept is standing in Yesod, and Tifereth is the next thing he sees. But I think the angel comes from the supernals.
For sure, yeah.
So,
I 100% agree with that, and I think, with this ritual, we are standing below Tifereth, so we are not seeing beyond Tifereth. So this is where, this is where we're looking at the Echad stuff, for instance, and he's referring to the false father. And that sounds bad, but it's just basically when you're looking up at the sun, that's, brightening up the sky, and that's all you can see. So you can't see all the stars and everything beyond it. So, and that's where we're at with this.
Right.
And it seems like, okay, we're drawing back the bow, we're dipping into the unconscious and firing that up to unify with the angel, so the whole shebang gets destroyed in a blast.
Let's finish with these demons. I think Bez is a sort of gnome. It's not spelled the same way in Egyptology as it is in the PGM. But that could be because the PGM is written in Greek, so there might be issues of transliteration, but I'm pretty sure that Bez is a household god that's worshipped all over Egypt, and is sort of like a dwarvish kind of character with a long beard and cross eyes, sort of like a goofy looking, friendly looking guy that defends the home basically from all manner of evil. And as the cult develops, he becomes like a good versus evil character. So Bez is like the good guy. And now that you say in the Golden Dawn ritual, Typhon was a third demon.
It was Satan / Typhon.
I thought Apophoros was Apophis.
It's described in the Neophyte as a serpent.
A serpent.
And Bez is described as the brutal power of demoniac force, and Apophis is the stooping dragon.
All right, well, here's Apophis. His Wikipedia page shows him as a snake, so and nightly battles with Ra. Yeah, this is the guy I was thinking of under the sea. So in a way, you could think of them as good and evil, because like the home dwarf being like the good local god, and the snake under the being the darkness that fights the sun at night. But they become demons here. I don't exactly know how this happens, but the idea of as the one as being like bread and the other being wine, like the
Eucharist,
the homey, hearthy kind of, obedient demon that protects your family being the bread, and then the mysterious night snake that fights the sun being the wine. You can see sort of how evolution of those ideas might happen. It doesn't, what's going on here doesn't necessarily tell us the PGM origins of this ritual are, right?
Yeah.
Like the Greeks in
Like the Coptics.
the Greeks in the Greek immigrants in Alexandria, I think is where it is, in Alexandria, who actually practiced this ritual in 200 years after the death of Christ, might not have had the same interpretations of these words as Crowley did. So
actually,
they might
worth
not say
discussing.
that. They might not say that Bez is a demon.
Yeah. I mean, I think Crowley's using all of these things for specific purposes. And like, for instance, his etymological definitions of these names and whatnot, they are largely based on Kabbalah and sort of associating with the Hebrew alphabet and with the tarot correspondences and that sort of thing, maybe astrological correspondences. And I think there's some of them are similar to certain words that, like ancient Greek words and whatnot, that he'll correspond to that as well. Like Soto, I think would be like close to Soter or Savior, and Photeth, I think, was like close to the Greek word for light and that sort of thing. So some of those kinds of etymological similarities. And then he'll have, like, he has Ptah, Apophrats, Ra. He actually uses Apophrats as this is a case of him using it as the dragon, but relating it to Nuit. So I guess as the circumference, whereas Ptah would be Hadit and Ra is Rahur Kuit in that case. But actually, there's a little passage in Liber 65 that might elucidate this as well, because in chapter 3, there is the passage that then the word of Adonai came unto me by the mouth of the Magister, mine, saying, O heart that art girt about with the coils of the old serpent, lift up thyself unto the mountain of initiation, and relating the old serpent to being the constricting desires and that sort of thing, because he goes on to, at least that's what he's alluding to in the commentary. And then, but I remembered, yea, Than, yea, Theli, yea, Lilith, these three were about me from of old, for they are one. Beautiful wast thou, Lilith, O thou serpent woman. And in the commentary and whatnot, he's referring to these things as serpents, Than, Theli, and Lilith, the three serpents. And I can't help but relate that to this Yesod place as well. And he ends up talking about the Lilith and how he enjoyed, but there was always this taint with it as well. So I think it's like the desire and the luxury of physical embodiment and life, but with that taint of the destructiveness that comes with it, and watching the decay in the future, and in the that it was born from the worm of slime and all that sort of thing. So I feel like that kind of helps us a little bit with that idea. It's that heart girt with a serpent, but this is sort of like the corrupt level or manifestation of the serpent, the unpurified serpent.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, whenever you see old snake, that old snake is specifically the King James Bible name for the dragon that falls from heaven in Revelation.
Yeah,
and it is called that old snake, who is, and it might even use the name Satan. Like, it might even say that explicitly. The dragon fell from heaven. He is that old snake
called the devil.
Called the devil, and then point him. That's the only place in the Bible where it points the devil back at the serpent in the Garden of Eden as well. So,
and Crowley was definitely reared on that on the King James version of the Bible on that too. So.
But then the climax of this ritual, almost the last thing you declare, you say, the heart girt with the serpent is my name, or something like this. And then you say the refrain one more time, and Sabao, such are the words. But like the last novel declaration anyway is the heart girt with the serpent is my name. So this idea of and in 65 too, there is this idea of the heart is restricted by the serpent. My coils shall never relax throughout the aeons.
Yeah, in fact, in 65, he he then tries to invoke the angel to help him, but the angel alone can't help him. So he also invokes the elephant god, and they come to his rescue and all this sort of thing. So it's sort of like, oh, that's interesting, and that's probably worth meditation as well.
I think it's chapter 5 of 65. There's a section that says, like, thou hast slain the ancient dragon that sat upon the stagnant waters. Then were the fresh springs unloosed that the folk athirst might be at ease. But then again, within a few pages, there's this thing about my coil shall never relax throughout the centuries. So the serpent is both this oppressive force, but also this is something you learn in Thelema, that the conditions are restrictive in the correct direction, and that fighting against those restrictions is the error that prevents you from attaining your adeptship.
Yeah, it's interesting that in both cases it's water as well, because what I was referring to is the chapter of water, and what you're talking about is releasing the waters onto those thirst.
As long as I've said that, there's a couple of quotations in here that explain it too. So the characteristics of the cosmos. This is in the middle of section B, sort of partway through the 6th paragraph. The characteristics of the cosmos. It includes a standard of structure, a rigidity to make reference possible. Upon these foundations of condition, which are not things in themselves, but the canon to which things conform, it is builded the temple of being, whose materials are themselves perfectly mysterious, inscrutable to the soul, and like the soul imagining themselves by symbols which we may feel, perceive, and adapt to our use without ever knowing the whole truth about them. The adept sums up all these items by claiming authority over every form of expression possible to existence, whether it be a spell, an idea, or a scourge, an act of God. It is of himself. The adept must accept every spirit, every spell, every scourge as part of his environment, and make them all subject to himself, that is, consider them as contributory causes of himself. They have made him what it is. They correspond exactly to his own faculties. So, there's this thing where the refrain of this ends with, and every spell and scourge of God may be obedient unto me. But this explains obedience as being the mutual understanding that they are the necessary conditions of my existence, And so it's not only that you are able to gain control of your environment, but that you gain acceptance of your environment as it is, because it brought you forth in the place where you are now, reciting Liber Samekh and being able to attain your adepthood. And that if the course of your life had run differently, well, the Enochian spirits tell me I'm not allowed to say this, but the course of your life just didn't run differently. There's only there is only one condition, and you exist in that. You are radically fated to end up where you are, and so having those every spell and scourge of God obedient unto you also means that you don't attempt to change them, except insofar as you're purifying your being to be in relation to them.
It's interesting that this is like where that idea that the adept is themselves God is really explicitly said here. With God in quotations, of course, but it's saying that a spell, that is idea, or a scourge, that is an act, of God, that is of himself.
I glossed over that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it's really and what you're describing is true, and it's always seemed to me that this idea that the individual is their own God, essentially, the individual is God, seems like megalomania in the extreme. It's useless in terms of megalomania because it's just going to send you off the rails. Taken here, the way you're describing, it's the ultimate responsibility, because you are responsible for every spell and scourge. You are making them all obedient unto you, but you are thereby putting yourself in not just control, but in direct responsibility.
It's so, it almost seems more profound in a way, right? To say, all my own ideas and all my own acts, let them be obedient unto me. You know, I mean, everyone in our generation saw Star Wars and saw Luke Skywalker meditating, and then saw Luke Skywalker try to levitate a stone. And we all tried to levitate stones, and none of us tried to stand on our heads. None of us tried to meditate, and none of us tried to do that handstand.
Yeah.
You know, somehow it seems more accessible, more possible that we could do telekinesis than that we could do feats of athleticism or feats of deep self-reflection. The something about this let every idea and every act of myself be obedient unto me. That is within reach, but it's something people really very rarely try to achieve. And here it takes the intervention of an angel to get you there, even if the angel is only I who am most myself. That no man hath seen at any time.
Yeah, it was well, I mean, it was interesting. I was telling you earlier about the experience that I had with my Enochian working and that, and I feel like I actually do want to briefly jump into that, if that's okay, just to sort of, because I had been working towards that, putting together the table and putting together the sigilla, like the wax sigillum DMF for the top, and then each of the ones for the table legs and the covers to go over the table legs, and all of these things, got the ring, got the lamen, got, you know, put all this stuff together over the course of about 6 months. And then I finally did my my working, which lasted 18 days altogether, and it was ended on August 4th, which was the 440th anniversary of Dee and Kelly being instructed to have the table finished by. And so it just, you know, it was a big build-up to this thing. And so I finally got through. I managed to get through this really extensive working where I was adding and adding the invocations, so it got pretty intense, like in terms of like it could take me 2 hours at a sitting, and I was doing that 3 times a day while trying to hold down a job. And that by the time I got to the end of it, the night before, I was just like deeply thankful that I was able to actually get through that whole process without ending up slacking or missing something or failing in some way. And, you know, it's the type of thing where you like to believe, you know what, even if nothing comes of this experience was still worthwhile. So the next day, seemingly nothing, or at least not nothing, just no visions in the stone like I was expecting. And so instead I had this brief vision, this brief kind of, I don't know, trance or whatever you want to call it, basically this insight into why God is one. And so like the whole time I was doing this thing, I was constantly, you know, when I wasn't doing any workings or was just out and about, I was doing the mantra constantly in my mind, Kul hu Allahu ad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, which is what Crowley was doing when he was doing the Aethers. That was the mantra he was using, which is the Arabic, God, say he, God is one, there is no other, he's yada, yada, yada.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
So that's what I was continuously going, and say he, God is one. And then on top of that, I was throughout the working using prayers and invocations from kind of Dee's time and from using Dee as inspiration and that sort of thing. And very kind of in that Christian mindset, I guess, putting on that hat of like, here's the archangels, the angels, and I'm talking to God, or I'm trying to work with God through his angels and pray to God and really deeply feel those prayers and pretty much re-engage with God, that relationship I've had throughout my life, but including my earlier, you know, youth, that relationship that I had with God. Not just going with how it evolved with Thelema. And so that put me very much in that kind of, there was a large Christian element to that, right? That Christian cosmology or kind of stance in relation to God, I guess. And so when it didn't come off the way I expected, the vision that I did get was, as I say, the why God is one. And this was a vision of basically, no matter what God you're worshiping, you're praying, you're inflaming yourself in prayer and invoking often. And it could be Jupiter, it could be Mercury, it could be Yahweh, it could be Jesus, it could be any God, but it's the act of worship, the act of prayer, the act of inflaming yourself in prayer, that energy that's built up. Somehow that was God. And even trying to put it into words, like I said before, it's kind of like it falls apart as soon as I'm putting it into words. It was direct and immediate when I was feeling it. And because of the state of mind I was in, it felt like a complete deflation. Not that experience per se. It was that experience seemed awful because it tore out from under me the what I'd been building up. And also it finally gave me, like, I've had difficulty with the God is man kind of thing that tends to go with the OTO, I think, largely, but it comes up in Liber and that sort of thing. And I've kind of had like a little bit of a difficulty completely wrapping my head around that or completely coming to terms with it. And I guess it's probably just baggage that I still carry, So in this case, it was like, okay, and that makes total sense out of that whole God is man, man is God kind of thing.
Well, what you were really trying to do, what you wanted to do during this period was this Enochian working that you had practiced, right? Mm-hmm. But you were also, for the sake of the podcast, doing Liber Samekh every morning, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reason you're talking about this is that the revelation you got about like the one God is the prayer. So no matter what God you're praying to, it's still monotheistic because it's the prayer itself that's the deity. I think this is an appropriate sort of insight to have for when you've been doing this ritual that's specifically directed towards the angel.
Yeah.
And I think I have two things to say about this, and they're very different, so forgive me if I seem to be bouncing around. The first thing I want to say about this, for specifically to listeners, is that Darren's done lots of magic work in his life. So if he decides that he wants to, build the whole temple correctly, and then go in and sit down in a very formalized way and over a series of many days, put together and a set of invocations and see if they work. Like that's super great for Darren. But if you're a listener who has not done lots of magic work in your life, don't invest 8 months in like arts and crafts before you know. What I did with my Enochian stuff that I did quite recently is to just like paint one of the watchtowers and hang it, and then do a bunch of invocations around it. And then, like, as I was doing that, I painted the next one. And then when a little bit of money came in, I booked a commercial or something like that. I bought the ring. And you can do, you can do the magic work to the degree that you're able. Mm-hmm. And as long as you have your eye on developing your tools and your temple, don't ever rest on your laurels and just say, "Oh, what I've got now is good enough." You
don't wait until everything's perfect to start.
Yeah, I mean, what I ended up with was the angels telling me that I really needed to put the space together a little better before I was going to get more. But what I got was quite a lot, and you put all the work into building the temple correctly, and felt disappointed by what you received because you'd put 6 months of energy into it. But now that you have the temple, you have to use it consistently, right? And your workings will improve as you practice them more.
Yeah,
right?
And there was I could palpably feel like an astral development happening over the course of the working. So, and I also had an impression that it did work. I had an impression that I was being told that it did work, but just not having that direct evidence was I should emphasize that, like, I mean, I'm very honest with myself, so I recognized that I had this natural frustration and resentment at the idea that it didn't, I didn't get manifestations or visualizations or visible or audible things happening in the way that I was hoping. And so there was a natural period of that I felt like I had to process that, and that's me being honest with myself and being honest with everybody here. It's a little difficult to go through all that and then admit openly that you seemingly failed, right?
Right.
But I'm hoping that I'm by talking about it. This is like this is legitimately one of the things that happens, apparently.
Well, both ways are the right way, right? Like, you have all your tools together, your temple's kind of what you want it to be, at least for now, and now there's nothing to it but to do it.
Yeah.
And so you'll get lots of practice in, and things will sharpen up over time, and you'll feel great about it.
Yeah.
I did not do that first. I started, just hit the ground running, and then I got to a point where my invocation was progressing faster than my arts and crafts, and I needed to take a break from invocation to develop my arts and crafts before I could get any further. And both ways are the right way, unless you've never done it before, in which case the arts and crafts are just going to become a procrastination tool.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Getting to it sooner than later. That's one of that's what I wanted to emphasize. Is that for listeners, getting to it sooner than later is better.
That was a legitimate thing. Just before I started doing the working, I legitimately thought to myself, is there any way I could find more things to busy myself with and put this off?
And then the second thing I wanted to say about that is, what was the second thing I wanted to say about that? Oh, crap.
Well, while you're thinking about
Moving on.
While you're thinking about it, I just wanted to say, like, one of the things that because you had mentioned previously, I had flippantly remarked, well, I don't know if it was flippant or not, but I was saying something about Jesus' last words on the cross being, oh God, why have you forsaken me? And you corrected me on that, saying that, no, that's the title of the psalm.
Of a psalm, and there's three versions of what the last thing he said was, and they're all titles of psalms.
Mm-hmm. In fact, like the two that I know of, one of them's the beginning of the psalm, and as I found out, the other one's the end of the psalm.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So like that day, the final day when I had that disappointment, but I also had that vision. I went for a walk to try and process things, and that came to mind. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to read that psalm right now. And it's somebody speaking from the point of view of a much worse situation than I was in. They're like being abandoned and hated by everyone and being tortured and killed. And God, why have you forsaken me? But at the end of it, he finally resolves, like, I will praise your name and pass it on to other people. And so I took that as being like, you know what? Or I felt an intuition that meant, well, my insight that I had, I can share. Now, that being said, the insight that I had was relevant to me at that time. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's, going to be true for anyone else at any given time.
So in what way was I said that I thought that your insight about the substance of the prayer being the one God and that all gods being one, I thought that was appropriate for the Liber Samekh ritual. And I want to make it clear that this is not orthodox, okay? This is my kind of understanding. We're getting a little bit riffy now, so yeah. I'm riffing. But my feeling is that most people coming into the AA will probably have a naive rationalist perspective. And that naive is not pejorative. Like, I don't mean, you're so naive. I mean, naive rationalist means that, like, there really are objects, and we really do, through the medium of our senses, have direct access to objects, and we can learn meaningful things about the world we're in. A book is distinct from a bookshelf, is distinct from a basketball, and we can do science about all of these things. And then, and the AA is quite happy, I think, to take people who are atheists as well. Crowley says because you can take atheists because the hatred of God is a passion, and I think most atheists would be offended by that characterization. But as long as you're passionate about your relationship to deity, they can kind of work with you. But by the time you get through the first order and get into Tefereth, what you should be experiencing is something like radical dualism, and that you should have begun to understand that dualism is self versus not self, and so it's not just hundreds and hundreds of discrete objects that interact with each other. It's you and everything else. And to the degree that you may still be a naive rationalist, you may still think you can do science about everything else. But even that veneer should be starting to come down. One of the few philosophy books that Crowley wants aspirants to read is The Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics by Immanuel Kant, where it's shown that the objects have the power of appealing to our senses. And so if the book is blue, I can't say the book is blue. I can say that the book has the power to impress upon my senses the idea of blueness, and that the qualities of the object are actually in the beholder. So this starts to break down as you go through the first order of the AA, until you realize there's like me, and I contain the universe. And then there's the universe itself, which is this very scary, amorphous, unattainable thing that I can't know anything about. And then once you're in this position of having realized a radical dualist perspective, the HGA shows up looking like you, the everything else that is the reflection of you, and you come into relationship with the not self as a kind of God, and become a devotee of that private religion. People who've had the HGA experience say they don't like to talk about it, but that's my kind of, I haven't had the HGA experience, so I am comfortable talking about it. And so you having monotheism imposed upon you from an external source, we've been talking about the violence of this ritual, how you try to defend your citadel and you can't, and the angel comes in and knocks over your ideas, and then for you to have him tell you that, like, I am God and the prayer is God, and this is whatever else you think is out there, it's really just your text. In the preface to this speech, to this ritual, it says something like, "Thou art he that, having made voice by his commandments, is Lord of all, King, ruler, helper." So the angel does the commandments, and the commandments make the voice, and the voice, and because the angel has commanded there to be a voice, that the voice hails the angel as king, ruler, and helper.
Yeah, I like the, because that reminds me of where it says, "Hear me, for I am the angel of Ptah Apophrats Ra." And in the commentary, it's pointing out that the adept admits himself to be the angel of his angel. So just as the angel is the transmitter of the word, so the human body and mind are the further transmitter of that same word. In the
PGM, the original, that word is something like prophet or vassal or something like that, and Crowley changes it to angel. But it's okay, at least in the English version. I don't know what it is in the Greek. But the word angel in Hebrew means messenger.
Yeah.
So like I am the prophet of my angel. I am the angel of my angel. It's sort of the same idea, but Crowley's translation, angel of Asar and Nefer, has a more. It has a more profundity in the way you're talking about, because especially if I'm right about the self not self dualism, those really being crystallized, that it emphasizes the way in which the two beings reflect each other, you know?
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that I've gotten out of doing this ritual for the past just over a moon is I think like just by this and things like Liber Astarte, where you're doing devotional things.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Crowley does recommend Liber Astarte as one thing that you could be doing to help this, as well as practices of yoga and reading of Liber 65 and that sort of thing. So, but Liber Astarte is devotional God worship. So you choose a god, and you for a few months you're just completely dedicating yourself, building an altar, doing invocations and whatnot. And in this case, this as an invocation, it's like you're training your mind more and more to focus on the angel. And I find that over time, one of the things that happens is you start to take seriously the duality between yourself and this angel. And whereas you could very easily just pay mouth service to something like that, you know, just saying a prayer every day and not really committing samadhi upon it, so to speak, you know, having that realness to it.
We could do more with this. We could go do like a sort of a close reads of sections A, B, G, A, B, F, G, or something like that, and pull some of the metaphysics stuff and a few more of the quotes about what it means to be the HGA. But why don't we make that decision later after you've had a chance to listen back to this and see how complete it seems?
Yeah, it might be debatable whether it's worth doing it while it's still fresh, or maybe leaving it until a later date when we can come back to it.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, do something else next month and then do that later. Because we've done so much, we did so much metaphysics in the last year and I do like the way in which the violence of this nuances the picture we've already established. But maybe it's too much of this. Maybe the conversation we've had is fresher than, you know, relitigating self, not self dualism and divided for love's sake for the chance of union and all that stuff that we've already talked about. So what I wanted to, do you know what, we asked each other this question all the time. Do you know what year this commentary was written? I don't.
Yes, it would have been in Cefalù because...
Oh my gosh, everything we read is written in Cefalù.
He was so friggin' prolific during that period.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the reason I can say that is because it's written, what's the wording? It was, yep, there we go. Prepare. Oh, it even gives the date. Prepared anno 17 at the Abbey of Thelema in Cephaloidium, so in Cefalù, by the B666 in service to Frater Progradior. And Frater Progradior is Frank Bennett.
Oh, cool.
Not Alan Bennett, don't mix that up.
Oh.
But
everyone's named Bennett.
Yeah, everybody's got to have similar names. Charles Stanfield Jones, Charles C.F. Russell. But yeah, okay, I'm just going off the top of my head. I didn't look this up recently, but I seem to remember he was, I think, the head of the OTO in Australia at the time. And he came to Cefalù to spend some time with Crowley. I remember an anecdote in the Confessions where Crowley mentions having walked along the beach with him, and Crowley was talking about something or other, and something he said kind of clicked off for Frank that like resolved some knot that he had been trying to untie. And but either way, he ended up like Crowley prepared this for him so that he could have an engagement with the knowledge and conversation working.
Okay, cool. So this is 1917 Liber Samekh?
Oh no, it's the 17th year of the Aeon.
Oh, okay, so 1921. Yeah, okay. So the PGM, I'm going to guess, Papyri Greco-Magica or something like this. Do you know?
That sounds about right.
The Greek magical papyri, what we call it now, it's not one book, I don't think. It's just a collection of bits and pieces of ritual from Alexandria in Egypt, but written in Greek by Greek speakers from about the 1st century to the 4th century, 5th or 4th century after the death of Christ. And so there's little bits of magic ritual. And I recently bought the book. It's not 100. It's like lots and lots and lots of little ritual fragments. And all of the Liber Samekh is on just one page. What's there is the refrain, but it doesn't say the refrain is part of the ritual. It says the refrain is something you do. You write something on your head and then you speak the refrain before the ritual. The ritual itself is section A, section B, all the barbarous names, and then the 2.5 prayers that kind of close it out. That's about, more than 1,500 years ago for the barbarous names and for some of those passages of invocation. And it seems pretty explicitly to be an exorcism, because the end of every stanza where it says hear me or whatever, it says to drive the spirit out of, so you're trying to cast demons out. Like it really is like the movie The Exorcist type of ritual. And then fast forward to the classical era of the Golden Dawn, the early days of the Golden Dawn. Mathers is doing a translation of the Thurgogoetia, which explains how to exorcise all sorts of demons and trap them in brass vessels and then get them to go and do things for you, make them servants. And then when that finally gets published in 1903, I think, Crowley is the editor, and he puts in the beginning both the PGM in Greek, the headless ritual, the PGM headless ritual in Greek, the PGM headless ritual in English, and then his own Golden Dawnified version. He's thrown in a bunch of pentagrams, taken the refrain, taken the little preliminary prayer from the end of the ritual and made it a refrain to pray to each of the 4 quarters, hear me, and then added some Enochian symbols, and then basically, and then for Liber Samekh, he's removed that stuff from the body of the text and just preserved more or less the original plus the refrain, changed a few of the words. So instead of Pharaoh, Oro, whoever, he calls it Asura Nefer and different things like this. And instead of Moses, he calls it, instead of Moses and the ceremonies of Israel, it becomes
I blanked on it because I've been using my own angel's name and my own my own name for those positions.
It becomes Onkof Nakansu and the ceremonies of Kem. I've been using my own name and the ceremonies of Thelema, because I've taken enough initiations in enough different groups that I feel like I do know many of the ceremonies of Thelema, so that's fine for me. But then he adds the long commentary that we've been analyzing today in 1921. So you can get 3 versions of this published ritual that are all different. And to emphasize the fact that what has antiquity is these prayers and the barbarous names. The movements, going to the quarters, drawing the elemental signs, that doesn't have antiquity. That's 1903. And then the visualizations where you extend the phallus way up into the heavens and then open it and allow it to receive the light of the angel, that's later again. Crowley does use this ritual for his own HGA ritual, but he hadn't done that yet when it was published in 1903. Crowley has an HGA ritual that he abandons that's very Enochian. Then he publishes this ritual in 1903. Then he receives the Book of the Law and says, I guess I'm supposed to be a teacher. I guess I should do my HGA ritual. And then he does this, the headless ritual, which we now call the bornless ritual, on his walk across China. So that's how it becomes how it goes from a ritual of exorcism to cast demons out of sick and crazy people to become a ritual of general invocation to sort of power up before you do an exorcism, and then finally a ritual to contact your holy guardian angel. So to say, again, prioritize getting started sooner. You know, if you don't know how to travel in the body of light, and these instructions about going around in circles and imagining different sigils and doing different gestures, if that seems esoteric, you can start by just reading the prayer as if it's on one page and reciting the barbarous names, and that gets you going, and then build it out as you go in the way you're instructed to do anyway in both versions of the Aberrant and in the AA instructions. You know, you build your own ritual for this. And
as Crowley says here, invoke often, and elsewhere, inflame thyself in prayer.
Yeah, I did this once, and it felt cool, but it didn't do anything. I did this once in my asana, facing one direction, only east, and just basically chanting the barbarous names and reading the prayers, and doing it 2 and 3 times a day for 8 weeks is better. You know?
I did this. I started doing this back in 2013, and I started getting really serious, sticking stuff on the walls to remind myself what the sigils were and all that sort of thing. And then I had a fire.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, the person downstairs tried to kill themselves by running the gas on the stove, and then decided to have a final cigarette for the road. And luckily I wasn't around at the time, but it was basically I ended up in a new place after that. So
this is another weird thing. Lots of Thelemites catch themselves on fire. You weren't the only one that year.
Yeah, that's right.
Caught themselves on fire.
Ram
Someone
had a
else.
fire, lost a bunch of stuff. I remember him talking about that one point.
Oh wow. Yeah, and other people we know have had fires. Thelemites like to light them. It's not just because there's candles around, I don't think.
No, there's weird stuff going on. I mean, I remember somebody else, having, and the only room that survived in the house was the room with the stele.
That's what I was remembering too, yeah. Although I won't say their name, but yeah. Anyway. Okay, so possibly more to come on Liber Samekh, but possibly not next month. Okay, cool.
Sounds good.
Good stuff, Darren. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, love is the law, love underworld.
Love is the law, 93.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at torontothelema.org. Watch for events on Meetup and the usual social media spots, and join us again in the darkly splendid abodes.
Jokes coming your way.
Curly cord joke number 5.
I'm going on Carson this weekend. I need to work on my tight 5 about curly cords. Was it Carson Daly or Johnny Carson?
I assume that joke doesn't need any help.